The quiet suburban community of Ridgeway Pines always pretended to be peaceful, but beneath the manicured lawns and neatly trimmed hedges, the HOA leadership thrived on control. Their rules were enforced not through unity or community spirit, but through fear, fines, and a constant obsession with surveillance. The president, Marla Hendricks, had built her reputation on being the kind of leader who knew everything happening inside the neighborhood, even things no one had ever told her. Residents often joked that she had eyes everywhere, though most assumed this was only metaphorical. That illusion shattered one evening when a strange clicking noise echoed around the side of my house. At first, it sounded like a loose gutter swaying in the wind or a squirrel trying to get into the attic. But the sound was too mechanical, too consistent, too deliberate. When I stepped outside with a flashlight and scanned the area, nothing obvious appeared. The noise stopped the second I moved closer, almost like it knew I was listening. Days passed, and the odd disturbance kept returning at random hours, midday, midnight, early morning, as if someone was watching and waiting for the perfect moment. My property had never been a problem for the HOA. I kept everything neat, followed the guidelines, and paid my dues early every single month. I wasn't the type to start trouble, but apparently, trouble had found me instead. I began noticing that HOA notices were becoming unusually specific, referencing things that could only be seen from certain angles, a tool left outside the shed for exactly 11 minutes, a package on my porch for too long, and even a remark about my backyard lights turning on approximately 3 times during the night. The level of detail was unsettling, almost impossible, unless, of course, someone had a direct view into my property. The realization hit slowly, like fog rolling in. Someone wasn't just watching. Someone was monitoring. As days turned into a week, the violations kept piling up with timestamps as if generated by a machine. There were moments I felt eyes on me even when the blinds were closed. At times I sensed a faint hum from the trees behind my home, a sound subtle enough to ignore but persistent enough to disturb. Something was hidden out there, something not placed by nature or accident. Eventually, I decided to investigate. Under the cover of darkness, with nothing but a flashlight and the determination born from irritation, I walked the perimeter of my backyard. The grass felt colder than usual, the air strangely still, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. When a glint caught my attention near the top branches of the old oak tree, I moved closer. There, barely visible, camouflaged against the bark, was a small surveillance device fixed at an angle pointing directly toward my windows. A secret camera. A camera placed without my permission. A camera hidden on my property. As the truth sank in, a slow simmer of anger began spreading through me. The HOA had crossed a boundary far bigger than any guideline violations they had ever written. They weren't just overstepping, they were trespassing, spying, and violating my privacy in a way that could ruin anyone's peace of mind. The fact that they had gone this far meant they felt untouchable, protected by their authority and backed by the fear they instilled. But this time, they had targeted the wrong person. Instead of confronting them immediately, I took pictures, angles, timestamps, everything needed to prove the device was installed without my knowledge. I kept quiet. The HOA continued issuing violations, unaware that I now knew the source of their sudden accuracy. Every notice only strengthened my resolve. While they believed they were building a case against me, I was preparing something far bigger. Something that would not only expose their secret surveillance but turn their own tactics against them. Over the next few days, I researched camera frequencies, signal disruptions, and drone detection methods. If the HOA thought they were the only ones capable of watching, they were about to learn how it felt to be monitored themselves. Their arrogance had blinded them. They assumed no one would challenge them. They assumed secrecy equaled safety. But their entire operation was built on a fragile foundation, one that would crumble the moment someone pushed back with the right evidence. The turning point came when I discovered that the device wasn't just a simple camera. It had motion tracking capabilities, wireless signal transmission, and a storage module designed to upload footage to an unknown receiver. This wasn't a cheap hobbyist gadget. This was professional-grade equipment, expensive, illegal, and installed for the purpose of gaining private footage of a homeowner without consent. It was bigger than petty fines. It was surveillance abuse. It was grounds for a lawsuit. But instead of going straight to lawyers, I decided to make the HOA feel exactly what they had tried to do to me. I planned something precise, dramatic, and unforgettable, something that would expose their secret operations in broad daylight. Something that would flip control. By the end of the week, the HOA board members had no idea a storm was brewing right under their noses. They continued sending letters. They continued watching. They continued believing they were in power. But the tables were already turning. And soon, they would realize that spying on the wrong homeowner came with consequences they never saw coming. The discovery of the hidden surveillance device didn't fade from my mind. Instead, it grew heavier, sharper, more intrusive with every passing hour. The HOA kept sending violation letters at a rhythm that matched the tracking patterns of the camera. Every timestamp lined up with the exact moments I moved around my yard, as if my daily routine had become nothing more than data points for their secret files. The invasion of privacy felt deeper by the day, and the weight of it settled into my home like an unwelcome guest. While they monitored my every move, I began monitoring them. Quietly. Patiently. Behind closed blinds and with steady hands, I mapped out the HOA board members' routines, the schedule of their weekly meetings, the times their office lights turned on and off, and even the path Marla took every morning when she walked her dog through the neighborhood like a self-appointed patrol officer. The more I paid attention, the more I realized that my situation wasn't unique. Other homeowners seemed nervous, careful, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting to be caught doing something wrong. It was clear that the HOA's reach extended far beyond my property. But unlike the others, I was done being silent. Before making any moves, I needed undeniable proof. Not just the camera, but the entire setup behind it. Over the next several nights, I watched the direction of the wireless signal using a small detector I'd purchased online. The faint pulses from the device traveled consistently toward one place, the HOA office. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Every time motion triggered the camera, the signal spiked, sending data straight to them. This wasn't random spying. This was organized. Controlled. Deliberate. I then activated phase 2 of my plan, exposing their network from the inside. With a small portable receiver, I positioned myself near the HOA office late at night. The building sat quietly behind a row of trimmed hedges, its windows dark except for a dim glow leaking through the blinds. That faint light was exactly what I needed. The camera's wireless output matched a frequency pickup that hummed stronger the closer I got. It took patience, slight adjustments, and steady breathing, but finally, the data stream appeared on my device. The HOA was receiving real-time footage from the camera on my property. Every movement. Every step. Every second. It was the final confirmation I needed. But gathering evidence wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the same pressure they had imposed on the entire neighborhood. To do that, I had to craft something bigger than a simple report or a confrontation. I had to make the HOA's own surveillance obsession collapse under its weight. That meant using their system against them, letting their secret exposure unfold in a way they couldn't control. The first step was disruption. Small, subtle, devastating. I rerouted the camera signal, not enough to break it, but enough to make the footage loop certain motions repeatedly. This meant their timestamps would begin conflicting, showing me in two locations at once. A rake appearing on the lawn that I'd already moved hours earlier suddenly reappeared in their recordings. The backyard lights that turned on 3 times in the night now flickered at random intervals, confusing their automated detection system. Without knowing it, the HOA was building a stack of impossible violations. The second step was psychological that I installed a decoy camera at the edge of my roof, angled perfectly where the HOA members often walked their dogs or drove past during their patrol rounds. Even though the decoy wasn't functional, the mere presence of a camera pointed outward, not inward, shifted the dynamic. For the first time, the watchers felt watched. Their glances were no longer confident but cautious, jittery. Every time Marla passed by, she slowed down, craning her neck upward as if trying to determine whether the device could see her. The effect was immediate. Their false sense of superiority cracked the moment they felt the same vulnerability they had inflicted on everyone else. But the final stage of my plan required timing. The HOA's monthly general meeting was approaching, a gathering where board members presented updates, violations, finances, and whatever else they used to keep residents compliant. Most homeowners attended reluctantly, but attendance was higher whenever drama circulated. This month would be different. This month, the HOA would be exposed during its own performance. In preparation, I compiled every piece of evidence into a clean, organized digital package: photos of the hidden camera, recordings of its signal output, logs of the data routing path, and the violation letters that proved their surveillance activity. But the masterpiece, the core of my retaliation, was the video compilation showing the HOA's own surveillance feed glitching, looping, and contradicting itself. It was impossible to deny, impossible to dismiss, and impossible to hide. On the day of the meeting, the atmosphere in the community center felt tense, as if an invisible storm lingered above everyone's heads. The board members sat in their usual elevated positions, confident, prepared to assert control like always. But today they had no idea the ground beneath them was already crumbling. While they reviewed their agenda, I slipped my encrypted USB drive into the media console, timing it precisely between presentations. The moment the screen flickered to life, confusion washed across the board's faces. What appeared wasn't part of their slideshow. It wasn't a community update. It wasn't financial data. It was the live feed from the hidden camera they had installed on my property. Every eye in the room widened. Every resident froze. The footage played without commentary, exposing everything: the spying, the tracking, the invasion. And then came the glitch loops, the contradictions, the mismatched timestamps that made their surveillance system look sloppy, dangerous, and undeniably real. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Shock. Anger. Betrayal. For the first time, the HOA lost control of the narrative. The board scrambled, but panic had already settled in. The residents saw the truth. They knew what surveillance meant. They understood what it felt like to be violated. They realized the HOA hadn't been protecting the neighborhood, they had been monitoring it in secret. And as the room erupted, the board members carefully maintained authority shattered under the weight of their own actions. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. There was still one more chapter left. One final move that would either end the HOA's reign, or expose something even darker lurking beneath it. Chaos filled the community center long after the surveillance footage ended. The HOA board, once untouchable and smug in their control, now appeared smaller, shaken, and cornered. Their carefully structured hierarchy cracked under the collective outrage of the homeowners. People whispered, pointed, demanded explanations, and looked at the board with a mixture of shock and betrayal. What was once a quiet room of obedient residents had transformed into a crowd on the brink of revolt. But beneath the noise, something colder settled over the room, something the board members themselves didn't even understand yet. Their downfall wasn't complete. What the footage revealed was only the beginning. The hidden camera on my property was not a single rogue device. It was a doorway into something bigger, something they had tried desperately to keep buried. Once the meeting dissolved into confusion, the board called an emergency, closed session. The moment they did, I knew I had pushed them exactly where I wanted. They were scrambling, desperate to regain control, blind to the fact that every move they made only exposed them further. Residents began gathering around me, asking questions with frantic energy, their minds reeling from the revelation that their own HOA had been spying on them. But I stayed quiet, steady, and focused. My plan wasn't finished. I still needed the final proof, the piece that would sever the HOA's power completely. Hours later, under the cover of a restless night, I watched the HOA office from a distance. The board members scurried inside like panicked insects, turning on lights, poring over documents, and desperately trying to identify how the surveillance leak had happened. They weren't worried about residents, they were worried about exposure. And that fear drove them to make mistakes. One by one, they pulled out storage drives, laptops, and files from a locked cabinet inside the back room. I recognized the metal case immediately from my previous stakeouts. It wasn't just a place for extra paper or outdated equipment. It was where they kept the evidence, their surveillance archive. Everything. But the real mistake came when one of the board members hurried outside to dispose of non-essential materials in the HOA dumpster. They were sloppy, rushing, overwhelmed. Lucky for me, sloppy people leave trails. The second he threw the bag in, I moved. Quiet, focused, swift. Inside the trash bags were printed logs of the HOA's surveillance schedule, old camera rotation maps, and even discarded receipts showing purchases of equipment identical to the hidden device I had found. More importantly, there were copies of letters addressed to several homeowners, warning them of violations that matched the patterns of secret surveillance. This meant I wasn't the only target. The HOA had been watching many residents, using the same covert tactics, hoping no one would question the sudden accuracy of their notices. This discovery turned the entire situation from a personal violation into a community-wide breach. And that was exactly the leverage I needed. I documented everything, every paper, every timestamp, every shred of proof. I didn't even need the originals, the digital copies were enough to make the board crumble. But now, I had something even more devastating. A trail that connected the president herself to the surveillance purchases, the camera installations, and the system setup. I submitted the full evidence package to the entire neighborhood via a public online forum that all homeowners used for updates. The documents spread instantly. Screenshots circulated. Video compilations were reposted. The HOA couldn't stop it, couldn't delete it, couldn't hide it. The community finally saw the truth laid out in plain sight. The board had violated privacy laws, trespassed on personal property, and collected unauthorized surveillance data for months. The uproar was immediate and explosive. Residents demanded resignations, apologies, explanations, but none came. The board went silent, trapped in their own mess. Their authority evaporated the moment their secrecy died. Homeowners called for an emergency vote to dissolve the entire leadership. And for the first time in years, the HOA had no power to suppress it. As the neighborhood gathered for the historic vote that evening, the mood was electric with anticipation. People who had once been intimidated now stood tall, emboldened. The board members sat rigid in their seats, pale and defeated, as the ballots were cast one by one. The results came quickly, with overwhelming consensus. The entire HOA board was removed from power. Their influence, their fear tactics, their secret surveillance, all gone in an instant. But I wasn't done. As the former president tried to slip out unnoticed, I sent the complete evidence file to state authorities. Not out of revenge anymore, but out of principle. What the HOA had done wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. The surveillance equipment violated multiple state privacy and property laws. Their secret archives, their unauthorized recordings, their data collection, all of it crossed lines that no organization was allowed to cross. The investigation began immediately. Within weeks, the old HOA leadership faced charges, audits, and penalties that would follow them for years. Their reputation shattered, their finances drained, and their confidence destroyed. They finally understood the cost of invading someone's privacy. They had built their power on watching others. In the end, it was their turn to be watched. Ridgeway Pines rebuilt its HOA from scratch. New leadership. New rules. New safeguards. Cameras were banned. Transparency became mandatory. Homeowners finally had the freedom they deserved, freedom from fear, from control, from hidden eyes. As for me, I walked through my property with a sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. The oak tree still stood where the camera had once been, but now it felt like a symbol, not of surveillance, but of resilience. A reminder that even the quietest homeowner can bring down the loudest tyrants when pushed too far. The HOA tried to spy on me in secret. But my revenge turned the tables so hard that their entire empire collapsed in the daylight.